Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Bill. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to talking with you today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you're here because I think that finances is something that people absolutely shy away from because it's uncomfortable, or people have different backgrounds or they've got different money mindsets, and so they're like, I don't really want to talk about that. That's really awkward. So can you tell my audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Bill Nelson. I'm a certified financial planner and a certified financial therapist professional. And I've been doing this work since back in 2016. I primarily work with engaged and newlywed couples, and helping to balance the quantitative realities of people's financial situations with what you just said, which is the money mindset stuff, and how the way we think about money interacts with the way we make financial decisions, and really working with those types of couples who are just starting out on their journey as a new family, figuring out the right ways to implement financial systems and strategies that are going to help them create the lives that they love.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I'll just give you a hard question right up the bat. What is like the biggest mistake that you see people make, or one of the pitfalls, I should say, that you see people make in their early years, like whether they're engaged or they're newlyweds?
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question. And I think, keeping your audience in mind, right, there are two things that come to mind. The first is not having a framework in place to make financial decisions together, right? We go through high school or college, if you go to college, or a professional degree or whatever it is, and you graduate, and you typically you just start managing money on your own, and that goes well for a while. And then all of a sudden we're adding in a second person to the mix, and potentially kids and exes and things, right? And making sure you have a system in place that you're proactive about identifying up front, so that when, not if, but when there are tough financial choices to make,
Absolutely. Yeah.
You have a system, you have something that you can point to that's going to help make those difficult decisions a little bit easier. So that's the first piece, and we can certainly dive into that more. But then the second piece that I see trip people up, and this is particularly true where the family dynamics are a little bit more complicated, are not addressing the quote unquote hypothetical decisions, right? That probably are going to come up at some point, but we just don't like to talk about them because they're uncomfortable, right? How are we going to handle supporting aging parents or supporting kids from a prior marriage? Talking about life insurance, what happens if things don't work out? Having an estate plan in place so that if something were to happen to one of you, then your assets are directed the way that you'd like them to. Those type of hypothetical what if type questions that hopefully you're not dealing with all of them, but likely you're going to deal with something in that realm of the types of conversations that people just don't enjoy having at some point down the road, and having something in place up front to again make those tough conversations and decisions a little easier.
Yeah, we did our will and estate planning 6 years ago. At this point, I don't even know. We do need to update it since our daughter is 4. But I remember thinking, I'm going to be okay, going into this meeting. So we met with a lawyer and all of this stuff. And I remember thinking, I'm going to be okay. I'm super logical, business oriented. That's my background. And it was really hard for me because then I got into the weeds and emotionally, and I was like, oh my God, what if something happens to my husband? But then, yeah, having this laid out, and the lawyer that we were talking to was like, you know what, your job specifically for my husband is not to make your kids wealthy. It's to make sure that certain things that they've got taken care of. So when they hit 18, you can leave them X amount of dollars. When they hit 25, or, and you can specify what it's for. But I just remember being holy smokes, those hypothetical situations. And then if you have a will from previously, because my husband did have one of those, making sure that, the X isn't on there, or like the updated version, like making sure that everything is laid out to like who gets what and what's going where. And something that I think trips people up is that fair doesn't necessarily mean equal, because at the time my stepkids were both underage. They were not 18 yet. So it was different. And then, it had it like once they turned a certain age, then X amount of dollars fell off or whatever.
Mhm.
And it was, like I said, like we need to go back and update it. But I think that absolutely starting with at least a will and a state, like, or a trust or whatever thing you want to do, anything to keep whatever you need to keep out of probate, out of probate.
Yeah, and oh boy, let me tell you, I could probably give a 3 hour lecture on all the things that you just talked about. But to highlight a few of them, first and foremost, right, is actually having an attorney that you work with, right? There
Yeah.
are some types of estate plans that are very conducive to going to one of, I'm not going to name company names, but you Google like do it yourself wills, like there are companies that come up that you can just plug in your information and have it spit out, right? Anytime there are things like stepkids involved, right, I would not advocate for going in that direction. Like you
No.
want to actually have somebody that you're working with. And yeah, the conversations aren't comfortable. And frankly, like most of the really good estate planning attorneys that I know are not so good at handling the emotional parts of these conversations. Like the fact that you're uncomfortable talking with them is actually a sign you probably have a pretty good attorney, because they tend to be very focused on the law piece of it, and not so
Yeah.
much on the other stuff. But
I was good in the meetings. It was like when my husband and I were like talking about it like together, then I was like, what if something actually happens to you? So like in the meeting, I'm good, but like then
mhm.
I would just be like looking at him like, oh my God, one day he's not going to be here. And I'd be like, he's like, I'm not dying today. Like, it's
Right.
okay, right? Like this is so like if something does actually happen. But yeah, and things ebb and flow though, right? Because especially like with my audience, like right now in your situation, you could be, I absolutely want to leave nothing to my stepkids because of whatever your situation is. And maybe things aren't working out. But then 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, you might have a change of heart and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, things are better. That might be personal experience there too. But
Yeah.
it's just like things ebb and flow, and everything you can always go back and change
Mhm.
unless something happens, of
Yeah,
course.
absolutely. And the other piece that I'd highlight there is you use the word trust a few times, and
Mhm.
I think that there's a trust are one of those things that people have a lot of misconceptions about. I found in just the conversations that I've had, like we tend to think of trust funds and things like that as rich people problems, and
Mhm.
that's not always true, right? And I
Mhm.
think that particularly in cases where we have either you have kids coming into the marriage, or your future spouse has kids coming into the marriage, right? Setting up there are a few different ways like that you could potentially set up a trust if something were to happen to one of you, to make sure that you are both taking care of the spouse who has survived and the kids, right, for regardless of whose side of the family they're coming on.
Mhm.
There are relatively straightforward and easy ways to do that, I mean, frankly, I find once you rip the band-aid off and actually get them in place, it actually tends to make the future financial conversations a little easier, right? Because
So
we're
much
not,
easier.
it removes some of the worst case scenario down the road.
Yeah.
um, like it removes them completely from the picture. So, for example, I often find that couples have an easier time combining money and managing money together after setting those things up, just because it makes sure that the kids are going to be taken care of no matter what.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like going, farther down the road, like, having like DNRs in place, or, whatever like whatever that looks like. It was really nice because everything is set out. Like if I'm in a coma, if I'm medically induced, like whatever, like here's what's going to happen. Here's how everything is broken out. It's very black and white. There's not like, well, it could be misconstrued this way. It could be misconstrued that way. Like my brother-in-law's got a law degree too. So like he looked over things and he was like, okay, like it looks good, whatever, like, or
Mhm.
here's changes that I would make. But it is like very safe, like that safety feeling of like, okay, I know what's going to happen. And it takes that uncertainty or like the unknown out, which as a stepmom, like there's so much uncertainty and so many unknowns that come into place. Like my situation now is completely different than what it was when we were navigating this part of it, because at that time we weren't going to have a kid at all. Now
Mhm.
we've got a 4 year old. So it was very different. And, I was super paranoid again, things are totally different now, but I was super paranoid about, well, what if, I get half of everything and then like it's split equally, 25,
Mhm.
25 for the kids. And they're like, well, that's not fair. My dad's wife is, a gold digger, whatever the case may be. And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, we are not on a level playing field here. Like I'm his wife, these are kids, so fair isn't necessarily equal.
Mhm.
And not that I think that, kids should be treated the same thing as a wife or a spouse or what have you. But then, like I said, we need to go back and update it because our daughter is now in the picture. And it's just, it makes those conversations, God forbid, when something happens, very easy is not the right word, but it's very cut and dry. It's a lot
Yeah.
easier. And there's not any, like, well, she's saying this because she wants that, or he's saying this because he wants that. It's like, this is what this person said and did on their own free will without, any outside influences of whatever's going to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So let me ask you another question. What do you think the biggest mindset money block is, like for younger couples or for couples like just starting out and navigating this?
Money block. I mean, I think that I see a few things, right? Again, I think that the first piece is just learning how to talk about money together and recognizing that oftentimes when we are talking about money, it's never just about the money, right? The money touches all aspects of our lives, right? Our
Mhm.
goals, our careers, our future dreams, our fears. And so, being able to learn how to talk about these things in a way where money really is, as you mentioned at the top, like the last taboo we have in our society. It's the last thing that nobody um talks about.
Why do you
And
think that is?
um to me, I think it's because it's uncomfortable for us.
Why?
I think a lot of people, the number, as somebody who's in this relatively rare position of talking to hundreds of people about their money, like over the past couple of years, the number one word I would use to sum up what I hear from about people when they talk about their money is anxiety,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, even when things are going well,
Hmm.
we just tend to focus on the financial concerns and the financial negatives. I tell a story in my book about a couple that I was working with who, paid off almost $200,000 of student loan debt in about like a year or two. I can't remember exactly how long it was. And, they sent me an email saying the last payment had been made. We met them about a month later, and like they let off the meeting before I could even get to like the congratulations on paying off this huge amount of debt. Like they just immediately went into like tax concerns that they had and like things that they were worried about there. And I said, like, okay, we can talk about all those things. We'll address those things, but we're going to pause for a second and celebrate this big,
Yeah.
huge accomplishment that so many people can only dream about that you made happen. Like
Mhm.
let's talk about that first. Um, we tend to worry about money, and in many cases, certainly rightly so. Like but oftentimes when I meet with couples, the first thing I'll ask is, what's going well for you financially right now, and it almost always takes a little bit to think about that because again, it's just not the thing that's on people's minds. But often, then once we kind of sit and talk about it, there's usually more than we expect there that's going well, and we just don't talk about it, right? Again, we just immediately talk about the problems and the fights and the financial stressors. And I think when we start money conversations, focus on that stuff. It's just a very glass half empty way to start the conversations, which just makes it harder to talk about.
Oh my gosh, yeah. What would you say like the top stressors money or like money stressors people have? Like or the like fights that people have about money? Because you just
Yeah, so I think again, it's not to say that every answer to your question has multiple things in it.
it
I
does
don't.
though, right? It depends, right? It always
Yeah.
depends.
So to me, I put these in two different buckets, right? The first is um, clashing perspectives on the
Mm,
role of
for
money
sure.
and the way that we view money, right? In the financial therapy world, we talk about money scripts, which are kind of unconscious beliefs that you have about money. They tend to be developed in childhood.
Absolutely.
They're often partial truths, like there are grains of truth to them, but they're not true in all cases. For example, A statement like more money would solve all my problems is an example
If
of
only,
money
right?
script, right? There are, so that, you know, that's certainly partially true, right? There are
Right.
many problems that you have that more money would help with. Um, but it's not going to solve all your problems, right? Things like loneliness or family fights and things, actually, more money can sometimes make those things worse.
Hmm.
And we all have hundreds of these unconscious beliefs that are driving our financial decisions, and almost always they are different from the person that we marry, right? There's a growing body of research out there that shows that we tend to attract our financial opposites.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so money fights in that context are actually very normal. And I think it's all about setting up a system that respects each of your kind of different perspectives and money scripts, that also helps you move forward as a family. And then the other kind of key source of conflict, ones that I think are a little bit harder to deal with, are around what I'm going to call like financial adjacent type problems, right? They're not necessarily about the dollars and cents, but they are about issues that have a financial impact, right? Balancing career, like, career choices and location, for example, right? If you and your spouse are both living in New York City and very happy there, and one of you gets a like once in a lifetime career opportunity, but it would require moving to San Francisco, for example, like, is that something that is even worth considering for your family? Is it a no-brainer? Right? Like, and again, like, most couples I find tend to have different perspectives on that, particularly where things where like one person is the primary
Got it. Yeah.
beneficiary. So I think, like there's just multiple types of ways that the kind of financial issues or issues with financial implications can cause conflict.
Okay. So when you say that people typically attract, again, a generalization, financial opposites, like coming up with a framework that benefits both of them, like what does that framework look like?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that I do with couples to help, particularly who are fighting about money, is to come up with a family mission statement, right? So
Hmm.
if you imagine that you are in charge of making financial decisions at your favorite company, right? Like, picture your favorite company, like what services they provide, and imagine you're in charge of making financial decisions for that company, and your employees come to you with two different product ideas or service ideas that you can do. Both of them look good on paper,
Hmm.
but you only have enough money to invest in one of them, right? How do you make that choice? And for companies, the answer is typically to go back to the vision statement, the mission statement that the company has, and make sure that whatever you're choosing is in line with that mission statement. It's going to help you get a little bit closer to that mission statement. And the problem is that most families don't have anything like that, right? They don't have anything that reflects what's most important to them as a family, that's clearly spelled out, so that when those tough types of decisions come up, like, there's no North Star to guide that conversation. And so that typically is the first thing that I do. And it can sometimes feel silly in the moment, or um, even self-evident, but just the act of having something like that you can then pull out, whether it be 6 months or 5 years down the road, to help guide some of those decisions, it makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. As soon as you said, think about if you're, the financial planner for your favorite business, I was like, oh, you're speaking business. Like that's like I love it because that's
Mhm.
how we kind of operate our house. I know that sounds kind of business-like and maybe a little
Mhm.
bit cold to some people, but I am a huge advocate for like house expectations in this house. Like this is how, things are ran, and less is obviously more, but especially when it comes to finances, because if I'm thinking we're on this trajectory and my husband thinks that we're on this trajectory, we're never going to meet anywhere in the same universe. And it's kind of, like with house expectations, if I think that a house should be run this way and you think that a house should be run this way, we're never going to meet, and it's always going to be friction. So
Mhm.
having that common goal, then everyone's on the same page and you're working towards the same whatever it is.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I love that. So once they come up with their mission, what would you say with the clients that you've had are like the most common missions that people have? Are they saving for retirement? Are they saving for like a vacation house, or like just fun toys, or what is it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will say that all the things you just mentioned, retirement, saving for college, like vacation house, just
Yeah.
first house, paying down debt, all those are goals. right? Those are to me fall a level below the
Mission.
mission statement
Mhm.
piece. The mission statement is more like, what do you want your lives to look like, right?
Yeah.
What do we want to use your money to do and live? And typically those are goals around, again, it obviously varies from family to family, but things like um, prioritizing family life, right?
Mhm.
Spending time with extended family, giving back to your community, traveling, just like kind of having experiences with different cultures. Sometimes there are faith-based um, pieces to your mission statement. Often, like just kind of being grounded in your community is a piece of it. Sometimes there's a no, no, that's not so much. But yeah, just say in terms of like what are the things that are most important to you as a family, and then what goals can we set to
Yeah.
help you accomplish those things.
So what does a mission statement look like? Like if you,
Typically, a couple bullet points, right? Pete,
okay.
don't overcomplicate it, right? But just coming up with a couple bullet points that spell out your family's most important priorities. And I have a variety of exercises that I we'll put couples through to help come up with these things, right? So I'm just telling you to come up with a few bullet points, but yeah, it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Um, yeah,
I could see people being like a polar opposites. Like when you laugh and you're like, I have a couple exercises that I put them through. I'm like, oh yeah, because I can imagine just being a fly on the wall in like some of these meetings and like the things that you see, like, oh my gosh, especially when it comes to money, like how people do whatever. Money makes people weird. Money makes people
it
so weird.
does. It does, which is why from my perspective, the mission statement actually should not focus on the money, right? It
Yeah.
actually, I find that there is much less friction in coming up with this kind of family value statement or mission statement than you would expect, because it purposely takes the focus off of the financial piece,
Okay,
right?
so give me an example of like what a mission statement would sound like.
Yeah,
If
so for my wife and I, right, just to give you some backstory and kind of what kind of how we came up with this.
okay,
You
great.
know, we have family on opposite sides of the country. I grew up in Massachusetts. She grew up in California.
Oh, so the
Uh,
New York and San Francisco thing is not far off. Okay.
exactly. And so we had some challenges figuring out where we were going to settle down and how to balance career decisions and like
Sure.
like the example I gave actually does it was inspired partially by some of the mistakes that we made along the way because we've moved around a little bit trying to figure out the right place for us to settle down as a family. And so for us, like when we talked about what we really wanted out of life, what was most important to us, right? We came up with a tier list, so to speak, right? And so
Oh,
that
okay.
no matter what, our immediate family is always going to come first, and our extended families are always going to come second, right? And everything else, career, location, etc., is third for that. And so when it came time to deciding where to plant our roots as a family, um, what was the right fit for us, right? In balancing all these things,
Love that.
not where the jobs were, because we also have been in a state of like job fluctuations like
Mhm.
crazy. So we face those decisions a little bit more than many couples have. But we had that tier list spelled out so that one extended family wasn't necessarily driving the decision, or one job opportunity um, wasn't driving it. It helped us kind of set the right priorities. Um, Oftentimes, I think kind of taking it from myself to just what I'm seeing in general, almost every couple that I've had go through this exercise has either a faith or religious component to it, or just a giving back to the world community service component to it. And there's a lot of overlap between those things, but for some couples, it's about right making sure that they are taking care of uh, people in need in their community, or helping the environment in some way, or helping their church in some way. And then from there, we can set goals across all those things to actually put numbers around what's
Right, yeah.
appropriate and what's given the other items in the mission statement. Like that's kind of how I see the interaction with those play out.
Okay. So your mission statement when it comes to finances is about your family. Is that what I'm hearing?
It's about our family. We have some goals around giving back as well.
Got it. Yeah.
Um, and then also just like prioritizing time outside of work together.
Okay.
So ideally outside.
So, okay. So I'm like, let me just wrap my head around this. So your mission statement is about your family, and then whatever that looks like, whatever your mission statement actually is, like your guys' immediate family is first, and then your second family is, or your in-laws
Mhm.
second, extended family second, and then like jobs. And I like how that's tiered. Um, and then whatever financial goals that you have come after that, like based, like, as long as all of this stuff is good, then we'll do like our financial stuff like based on that.
Correct. And so, for example, right, there are some couples that I work with who set goals to travel internationally every
Mhm.
year and setting X amount of dollars to visit Spain or Thailand or whatever. That goal is not a great goal for my wife and I, right? Because we have extended family all over the place, and so to set a goal in line with our mission statement of prioritizing our immediate family and then also our extended families, we have goals around how much we're going to spend per year on travel to Massachusetts and California and everywhere in between.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I like that. That totally checks out. So if somebody is struggling with they're engaged or they're newly married, or even better, they're like they're in a step family. Actually, no, let's do this. So let's speak to my younger self. So I'm a brand new stepmom. My husband and I are dating, we're engaged, maybe we're newly married. I don't have any kids. We don't plan on having kids. What advice would you give to that couple? Or somebody that comes in where one side's got kids and the other side doesn't?
Yeah, great question. So the first piece to me is making sure that you are talking about money as you were talking about some of the other really important pieces of what you're expecting your family to look like, right? I often get the question of like, when do we start having serious conversations about money? Like, and to me,
Day
I
one.
put
Just kidding.
yeah, I put it in the realm of things like um, religion actually is a good example, right? You're not going to likely bring up religion with somebody on a first date, but by the time you get engaged, like you should make
Definitely
sure you're on
no.
the same page with that, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not, that's a sign that there may be some issues in the road ahead. I kind of put money in that, like I compare it to that, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
I wouldn't be pulling out credit reports and pay stubs on a first date, but by the time you get married, you should be aware at least of the other person's financial situation and how they're viewing money. Um, the second, I mean, really, the advice I would give to somebody in that situation are um, exactly what I led off with, right? I would try to come up with a mission statement that focuses not so much on the finances, but what we want to accomplish in our life. That's certainly going to involve um, stepkids and supporting them, right? But then from there, we can then set some goals and like how do we appropriately prioritize this without making it the dominant factor in
Hmm.
our family's financial plan? How do we make sure they're taken care of, but we're also not sacrificing like our retirement goal, for example,
Yeah,
in the process? Um, and then
I think
finally,
that's great
like
advice.
I think that the like what if type questions are super important whenever there are kids involved. I don't typically advocate for things like prenups or postnups, which are the same thing as prenups,
Mhm.
just after you're
Gotcha.
married. For many families who are starting out, but when kids are involved from a prior marriage, that's a case where oftentimes it does make sense to have something like that in place, at least for a period of time, right? At least until the kids are grown and so on. Like having those types of conversations, right? Having the estate planning conversation, like that again, I wouldn't start with that. I would start with like what are our goals for our family, right? What do we want our family life to look like? And then how do all those pieces fit in?
Yeah, I think that's actually great advice because I may or may not have done this in my early years as a stepmom, but like I was very focused on, I was super independent, like had my own job. I did a lot of traveling and we do travel a lot. So when you're talking about that family that's got like X amount of dollars they're, setting aside for travel, my husband like maintains it, but like we go back and review our budget for the year pretty often. Or, we go in there and make tweaks or like, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. It's not a weird conversation. It was extremely weird for me at first, but I was very much like, listen, I'm moving into your guys' house. those are your kids. You know, I'm just like new on the scene. I'm doing my own thing. Like I've got my own money. I can pay for my own stuff. I don't need your money kind of thing. Obviously not a very good mindset, but that's what I was doing at the time. But now it's completely different. But what I'm like, okay, so when you've got a new stepmom that is coming in and she thinks the same thing, and the more you're talking about money and the more, you know, like if she is, you know, and things could very well be going sideways. They were absolutely going sideways, like in our situation at the time. Um, very much digging my heels in of like, I'm not paying for anything that comes from like your previous life. Like that's not my responsibility. You know, you chose to get married, you chose to have kids, all of the things. But I like the idea of changing it from the focus of the kids to like, what are our goals?
Mhm.
Because it's, yeah. And like, I see you smile, but I'm like, yeah, because me, like super headstrong, like super like in your face, very direct. It takes a lot to like sometimes get through my like thick skull, but like it's, if you take the focus off of the kids and like, okay, for our life, what do we want our life to look like? The
Mhm.
kids are a factor of it, absolutely. The house is a factor of it, absolutely. Retirement, you know, all of the things, college. Um, but yeah, I think that's a really great way of like getting everyone on the same page without being like, hey, Bill, get it together. Like this time kids are in here, like they're obviously a part of it. Like we still need to talk about them. But like, what does our life look like? And then break it down from there. I think that's
Yeah, and if I was talking to that younger version of yourself who was digging your heels and saying I'm not going to pay,
so
etc.
they were in cement.
What I would have said maybe in a more gentle way than I'm about to say now is like the kids and the stuff from his prior life are going to affect you. Period.
Yeah.
There's no avoiding that. To take the stepkids piece out of the picture to maybe help people in this situation see what I'm talking about a little bit. Imagine you were marrying somebody with no kids but $200,000 of student loan debt, right? And a very normal reaction that I see all the time from people who are in that situation are like, oh, okay, that's his debt. I'm not going to pay. I'm not going to pay that debt.
When you're
And
married.
what happens? Like, let's fast forward with this, right? Your spouse is struggling with student loan debt, right? They're constantly just making payments on the debt. A ton of interest is built. Like they're kind of fighting this uphill battle against this. While you're continuing to pay for your stuff and doing really well. Um, by the time you're 55 or 60, right, you might be in a position to retire early because you have been diligently saving all along, and have been making all this progress, and your spouse is nowhere near ready because they've been paying for their stuff, and so you retire early and you travel by yourself while your spouse continues to work, and like you haven't combined anything up until this point, so why are you going to start now, right? Like it gets messy in the long term, right? When people come into the marriage and his problems are his problems, my problems are my problems, like it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form, whether it's now or in the future. The question is, how do we allocate things in such a way where we're both getting to where we want to go together, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the right move is for the spouse without the student loan debt to like just pay it off all in one lump sum or to pay as much as they can toward it. But what it does mean is that we need to understand that like his financial problems or her financial problems are things that are going to affect you both, and the sooner that you realize that, the easier it is to come up with a solution that isn't going to hold you back.
Yeah. So what worked for us, my husband makes quite a bit more money than I do. So what worked for us was not to split everything 50-50. That's not right. Equal is not always fair. So then we allocated like, okay, what are sunk costs? The house, child support, car payments. If we had car payments, whatever the sunk costs are, like those, that's just what it is. But then the other parts of it, okay, like how can we break these things down? Okay, so you're paying for these things, you're paying for those things. So it was compromise. Actually, that word was in our wedding vows because my husband's the only guy that I've ever compromised with. Like I said, very stubborn, very like thick-headed,
Yeah.
thick-skulled, whatever. But it was like getting to that mindset of like, because prior to being with my husband, like money was a very like I was your typical client, like that's a really weird conversation. I don't want to have it. It makes me really uncomfortable. I didn't grow up with anything. and I was very well aware of it. And money was just always a conversation that like you never talked about. Like, and you don't really talk about money, especially if you don't have it, right? And so then now to like be married to somebody and I have to work with them on something that embarrassingly like I didn't really know that much about. I was telling you before, like my 401k or like retirement accounts or things like that. Like I had somebody when I was really young that was like, hey, we like you should probably get in on this, or like you should do something about this. And I'm like, oh, thanks, because I didn't know anything about that. Like that wasn't a conversation that we had in our family ever growing up. And so now to be on the other side of the knowledge coin and like know a lot more about it and know that it's not scary. Are the conversations always super comfortable? Not really, but I didn't die. Like I'm still here. Like it's okay. It's things are going to be uncomfortable, but you have to be comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations because that's where the growth is. That's where you find out like if you guys are or you're not on the same page. And it's okay to like change your mind or maybe see something a different way and go back and be like, hey, like I did, like, maybe I didn't handle this the best way. What I think now is this, or what I thought then probably was a little like standoffish or a lot standoffish. Like I didn't know. And I wasn't able to articulate that I didn't know because I was embarrassed or I was scared or, I thought you were going to judge me.
Yeah, and recognizing that even in the least complicated family systems, like differences are normal, right?
Yeah.
Like I've only met one couple who came to me claiming they were on the same financial page about everything, and it turns out one of them was lying about it.
Shocking.
Oftentimes we think about like saving and spending differences, or one person likes to save a lot more money than the other, but there's a lot of other ways that can manifest too, right? From appetite taking risk to the
Yeah.
degree to which you want to be um, interconnected financially or not, to the I talked about risk. Sorry, I just blanked on the other common one. Just like the degree to which you want to be hands-on and how detailed and frequently you want to be reviewing things. Like those types of differences are common.
Mm-hmm.
And so just understanding that that's normal. If you're feeling that friction, it's completely normal.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you're doomed to a life of like constantly butting heads about it either.
Yeah, you guys can have a difference of opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a super simplistic version, but like let's say I like sausage pizza and my husband likes pepperoni. We just have a difference of opinion
Mm-hmm.
on like what we like, but it doesn't mean that we can't compromise and like work together to like make something happen. Let me ask you this because this is a huge question I get about finances. Would
Mm-hmm.
you or do you recommend people join everything or do you recommend that they keep them separate? I see you laughing like, oh, I get this question all the time too.
I do get this question all the time, and my answer to that question is absolutely infuriating, but I am convinced it's the correct one.
Okay.
My answer to that is there is always a right decision for what to do. Like, should you combine everything, something, or nothing? And
Oh, wait,
that
like
right
you even break it down
decision,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, like there is always a right decision. There is no ambiguity about it. However, the right decision for some couples is different than others. And
100%. Yeah.
the challenge is you need to figure out what the right system is for you. I will say I almost never advocate for keeping everything separate, right? They're usually for couples who are dead set on keeping everything separate. That is a sign that there are other dynamics and things going on that we need to address. And by not being willing to combine some things, you're turning your head from a bigger problem. And so that doesn't mean you should just combine everything out of the gate, right? But like,
Thanks for calling me out. That was definitely me.
anytime, right?
Yeah. Okay. Wait. Hold on. I'll give you.
Am I right about that though?
Yeah. 100%. Totally right. As you're saying it, I'm like, damn it. That was like my hands are sweaty. Yeah. Yeah. That was 100% totally me. Like I said, I struggled a lot, and I know that you listened to the first episode, but like I struggled a lot, like as a stepmom. Like I was Googling constantly. I mean, not constantly, but like very consistently read every night, like how to get divorced because things were not what I wanted them to be. Like I did not sign up for this crazy life. I don't know what's happening. So for me, it was a safety blanket. Like if I keep everything separate, it's a clean break. We get divorced, like it's easy.
Yeah.
But then like the stepkid part of it, like and the house and like all of these
Mhm.
things that like my husband had done pre me, I was like, that is not my stuff. it was the lack of intelligence when it came to it. But again, it was the uncertainty, like the unknown part of it. Not everything is completely separate now because we address the bigger issues, like whereas like hiding behind the curtains. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, now we do have, not everything's joint though either. Like I still have
Right.
my own bank account. He still has his own bank account. We are like next to kin, like he can sign into mine anytime that he wants. We do have a couple of joint accounts. Um, we have a joint credit card. Like I've got my own credit card. He's got his own credit. Like not everything is completely joint. But not everything is completely separate anymore. And my husband was, oh, everything can be completely together. Everything can be completely separate. At that point, I think he was just doing damage control, to be 100% honest with you, like for me.
Sure.
And it's worked out. Like
Mhm.
I had to come more towards him. Like I said, compromise had to be in our wedding vows because I didn't compromise at all. And so, but now I've softened a bit and I've come way more towards him.
Yeah, and I think that the problem I see in my industry, right, is that us as financial planners, I'm gonna paint with a really broad brush, right, are really hard at addressing those types of questions with empathy, right? There are plenty of financial people out there who you can find pretty easily who will say you always need to combine everything always, right? And there was a study that came out a couple months ago from, I think it was Indiana University, who found that couples who combine everything have, like, not only do they have better marriages, but the act of combining everything demonstrated that. Like they took a bunch of young couples and divided them into camps and told half the people they needed to combine everything, told half they until the other half they couldn't combine anything, and then looked at what happened to them over a period of years. And the couples who combined everything just had, like, every thing that they measured was better there.
Mhm.
And so I saw a lot of people in my industry when that study came out who said, okay, great, that means you got to combine everything because combining everything is going to make your marriage better. But the problem with that is that everybody who participated in that study, everyone was willing to be told what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if everybody in a world where everybody is willing to be told what to do, like, those results are pretty easy to understand. But that's just not the way things work in the real world, right? Like you can't, like, if you drug a bunch of people into that study kicking and screaming about the
That would be
idea of
me.
combining everything, right? Like that wouldn't have worked for
I would
you.
have hated it. Yeah.
And you shouldn't feel like that needs to work for you because it doesn't. Like you don't need to take that step. What I would like to see in those circumstances are, like, what are the steps we can take to combine the things that are going to make your life easier, right? Because combining some things absolutely will make your life easier. And what can we do to make sure that you have the financial security blanket you need to be willing to start working together
Yeah.
financially? And if we can get really clear on what it is that we need to address to make that something that, like, a step that you're willing to take, that's the way we start to move forward.
Yeah. And I love that you speak about that security blanket. Like I said, that was totally something that I was like, I'm not super comfortable with this. Granted, I didn't have the knowledge, but then once I was like, oh, everything is spelled out. This is great. Like I love this because there's not the uncertainty, there's not the unknown. Again, as a stepmom, there's so many uncertainties, so many unknowns, and you're just like, I guess I'm here like along for the ride. So let's say that somebody's like, okay, I've listened to this podcast. I know that, we're going down the path of not something that I want to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we need to see a financial advisor or a financial therapist, which I was like, that's amazing. I've never even heard of like a financial therapist until you said that. And I was like, that's really cool. Um, but what would you say they should probably do prior to their first meeting?
Um, so my gut answer that I'm starting to walk back a little bit is to say, like, nothing, come as you are, like they'll meet you where you are.
Yeah.
But that's not totally true, right? I think the first question is this a step you are taking on your own, or is it a step you are taking with your spouse, right? If both of you agree, yeah, what we're doing isn't working right now, um, we need to meet with somebody, right? That, um, in those circumstances, I would say, like, you don't worry about pulling together all your statements before the first meeting that you have, right? Um, you just need to come into that meeting with a clear head, and knowing that things are going to get tough, and there are going to be some tough things that are addressed, but it's a step that you need to take to move forward, right? In those types of circumstances, I would not be like, you don't start with the spreadsheets for those conversations. If you're not, like, if your spouse isn't on board with this, my question is why, right? And I would encourage you, like, I mean, you don't, you can certainly meet with somebody on your own, and like that's great, but the typically what I tell you to do in those circumstances is first and foremost just make sure there are no, like the way you're asking, like,
Yeah.
is
Conducive to get them to
one
go.
that is conducive to getting a positive response, right? In
Yeah.
terms criticism and contempt and things like that. Like, just double check that you're, like, I'm going to invite you to just take 10 seconds to entertain the idea that the problem might be in the way that you're approaching this, and
Right. Yeah. Go
reflect on
figure.
that. And if the answer is no, it really isn't in the way that I'm approaching this, then great, then we move on, but at least we've checked that box,
Okay,
right?
wait. Have you ever asked somebody how they're approaching their?
Usually by the time people come to me, like usually I meet with couples together, but
Okay.
right by that point, if only because a lot of the content that I put out there that people see ahead of time maybe takes care of some of that stuff.
Yeah, right.
I but more often than not, hmm, usually when people are coming to me, like
Okay.
the tonal type conversations are taken care of.
Okay.
What I often see though is, like, in terms of like, what can you be doing differently, right? Just the person who's reaching out to me holding things back from their spouse, like,
Mm.
I mean, like the first time like my eyes were open to this, it was with a married, a guy who said he was married, and but it was only him on the call, and I was really surprised about that at the time. And the reason why is that his spouse didn't know he had credit card debt, and like
Oh,
he was
yeah.
embarrassed to tell her about it. And like those are the types of things I usually find that are more like the things that are in your court that are holding the
Yeah.
conversation back, is whether it's secrets or whether it's things you're just embarrassed to admit, that type of thing. um I have a whole chapter in my book about kind of how to like self-diagnose the stuff, but I think just that from a starting point, it's, is there anything that I am doing that's causing us to not be on the same financial page? If that's not the case, then like, what do we think their concern is, right? If
Mhm.
you were imagining like you're in a theater, like in the balcony looking down at you and your spouse talking about this, like, what do you see your spouse doing on that
Yeah.
stage, right? Like, where is the conversation going wrong, and just in trying to understand their perspectives, and like what the disconnect is. And when all else fails, make a smaller ask.
Hmm.
you know don't ask them to get up and run a 5K with you. Just ask them to get up and take a walk around the block.
I love that. Yeah. And I love the visualization too. I do that too, like with clients, like how does, when you ask, because a lot of the times I stood in my own way because I wasn't asking things appropriately, or I thought that I was because I was being super direct. Well,
Mhm.
you can be direct and kind.
Yep.
My husband used to tell me like we need to work on you being a little more diplomatic. And I'm like, well, why? Like everyone knows where they stand. And he's like, yeah, that's the problem. It's not always a good thing. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Anyway, so once I got that under control, shockingly, you actually do attract more bees with honey and not vinegar. I know that's like wild,
Mhm.
um, but I would say like I do say that to stepmoms like when I'm coaching them, like, okay, when you're asking things or when you're telling your partner things, like, what does that sound like? Like, tell me. And then sometimes I'm like, that's great.
Mhm.
Again, like scale it back, or hey, you don't have to fix this, whatever. But then sometimes I'm like, did you see your face? So I always say, come up with whatever you're going to say, practice it. And again, it sounds really dorky. Practice it in front of a mirror, because sometimes whatever's coming out of your mouth is not matching whatever is on your face. And that's a huge thing. But I love the visualization of it. Apparently, words are hard for me today. The visualization of what does that look like? Because then you can help them, like, okay, if they're bringing up this is their stressor, like this is their concern, here's how we can break that down. I like that. It's really good. I feel like you've done this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you said that their mission statement, like they go back and check it. I mean, their mission statement, they go back and check it like 6 years, maybe like, I mean, 6 months, a year, 3 years. Like, do you think that it changes throughout the course of their marriage?
Yeah, sorry. I think what I was saying when I referenced those points in time is more along the lines of like when you face a difficult decision
Got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
six
You're
months, a
right.
year,
Yeah.
3 years down the road, then you go back and just like reflect on it. Mission statements do change over time, absolutely. They do not change that frequently, though, right? So to
They
me,
do not what?
they don't change super frequently.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Um, if you find yourself questioning your mission statement 4 months later, that's a sign that you didn't do a good job completing it right in the first place, right? And I think that trying to view that mission statement as something that is objective, right, and set in stone is generally a good idea. But of course, you do want to review periodically to make sure that things are up to date, that things haven't changed. Every few years, right, is typically kind of a good cadence for that.
Hmm.
Whereas something like a specific goal about saving for college or buying a house, like those are things you want to be tracking more frequently.
Yeah, okay. And so you had talked about spreadsheets too, like you don't come into like a financial meeting like with spreadsheets. So on what would be on the spreadsheet for somebody that is
Um,
like, I have no idea,
I
like a budget?
nothing at first, right? I
Okay.
think that if the types of problems that we are talking about here are the primary things that you're worried about,
Mhm.
um, you don't have a budgeting problem, right? You don't have a like I don't need to see a spreadsheet with all the balances of your accounts quite yet. We need to figure out what the disconnect is and address that first, right? There is no spreadsheet in the world that's going to solve the problem of I'm getting married into a family with 3 kids
Mhm.
and like I don't want any of my money to go to those kids because I'm afraid it's going to end up with the ex
Mhm.
at some
Which is
point.
a huge fear that I see all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so oftentimes people think when they're meeting with a financial planner, like we need to go right to the spreadsheets because that's just what we're conditioned to believe. But like, the spreadsheets don't really matter immediately. They matter a little bit, right? But like we can get the details we need to at least get started just by having a conversation. And like you shouldn't feel the need to have everything super organized either, right? Like I think that feeling like you need to pull all your retirement account statements and gather all your like go get a social security statement, like pull all these documents together, like that can be an inhibitor to getting some of those things done. And like I'd rather have you just get the process started and we'll fill in all the details as we
That's
go. Right.
interesting.
But if most of my clients waited to have everything ready to go and like organized on their own before reaching out to me, like I never would have met them. Right. Part
Right.
of my job is to help people get organized and get everything in one place.
And what do you need? Like, right? Like you're going to tell them like, okay, you need this or you need that. Okay. So I know you're a financial planner advisor, but you're a financial therapist. I have been like dying to have you like talk a little bit more about this. Like I've
That's
like put it in there a few
wonderful
times, but
because
I'm like,
it's such a hard thing to address. So I will say off the bat, like I am not a capital T therapist.
correct.
I do
Yeah.
not have a mental health degree. I am a member of the Financial Therapy Association who has the certified financial therapist practitioner
But I
designation.
love it though. Yeah.
And it's I think they realized as soon, not to put words in their mouths, but I think they realized as soon as they named this credential that it was going to create some confusion, and all that's happened since then is confusion. So to be clear, right, I am a financial planner with a background in financial planning and experience helping couples, and I use some financial therapy techniques in my financial planning work is the way that I like to describe it.
To get through those hard conversations or to
Correct.
get the answers to the hard questions.
And to not ignore them, right? I mean, I was point
Yeah.
blank trained back before I went on my own. I worked with a large investment firm that a lot of people would know the name of, and I was point blank trained. Like when couples are in your office and they like a money fight comes up, you distract from that. You immediately change the subject to get back on safe ground. That was how I was trained in this industry, and
Does it make you laugh now?
I still operate that way. And so I've kind of made it my goal to do the opposite of that.
Okay, so what do you do if somebody's in your office and they start fighting? What do you do?
Highly depends on what we're fighting about and what the nature of the conversation is. I think that my primary job, like I'm not going to resolve the argument
Right.
for, and I, other than in really extreme cases, I don't take sides
Hmm.
in meetings. I often have a perspective on who's right and what needs to change, and I will do my best to help guide you both to get to that point. But my immediate goals are to try to de-escalate the
Hmm.
conflict, right? And to identify what it is the person who's raising the conflict needs as part of that conversation, right? Anger and um, frustration, like those are things that are indicating there's an unmet need going on, and
Safety.
identifying that and then trying to fit all these things into the piece of what I know about the couple and helping them to implement some of the things that we've talked about to help make those conversations easier. But in the immediate step, it is not to dismiss, but to try to de-escalate the conflict, working towards compromises or collaborations, things like that. And it's just highly variable depending on the nature of the issue in question.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine like the fights that you've seen or like the things that have been said. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the stories I could tell.
Okay, so stories you could tell, speaking of your book. So talk about your book a little bit. Like tell me all about that.
Yeah, so I never necessarily saw myself as somebody who was going to set out to write a book, but one thing led to another, and it came together last year. The book is it's called Marriage Centered Money: How to Get on the Same Financial Page and Achieve Your Life Goals Together, and it's designed to help couples identify what their starting point should be. So there's kind of three different parts of the book. The first is just kind of the overview of the concepts and what we're talking about, and a little bit of my backstory. I dive into some of which we've touched on here, but I go into a little bit more detail. And then the second part is what I like to think of like what you would expect to see in a relationship book, just with kind of viewed through a personal finance lens, so to speak. So stuff about how to get your spouse on board with your plan, and understanding each other's money histories and the money scripts piece that we talked about, and financial conflict resolution, as well as some what I call red flag type issues, where like if these things are coming up, that's a sign that you need to reach out to get some help.
Mhm.
And then the third piece is more the like how to build a financial plan with the relation, like that, while balancing the relationship piece in mind. So we go through some of the exercises on how to develop a mission statement, how to set financial goals, how to pick the right bank account structure
Yeah.
for you. Like I try to just kind of go into as much detail as I can on all those topics.
I love it. So it's like having a meeting with you, but through a book and they like work through it on their own. Like there's framework in there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't necessarily hold anything back in the book. There's only so far that I can
Right.
kind of help people in a way that kind of makes sense for most of the people who are reading it. So, like for example, I don't go into a lot of the detailed estate planning strategies that
There's so much.
your audience probably would be interested in, because that would be a really boring book, I think, but also just
It'd be really, really dry.
yeah, it was hard toward the end, right, when we get into the more financial topics, to write something in a way that A, was interesting, and B, was made like addressed most people who were reading it. So like there's plenty of details to be filled in, but you'll at least have the strategy and framework from the book. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, with the financial part of things and like it being dry or like people just glaze over and they're like, I have no idea. And it's not interesting anymore, right? Like people want
Yeah,
the shiny object. So I love that you're like, I tried to write it interestingly.
yeah, it's actually the second book I've ever written. I wrote a
Oh,
book
okay.
all about like retirement planning for young couples, and literally 80% of it got thrown in the trash because it was the most, like, I was bored reading it, and I like numbers. So I'm like, no, I'm not putting this out into the world. Then I took 20% of it, and it became the backbone of some of the chapters in my actual book. But being readable was an important part.
Right. Yeah, they actually have to like get through it and like finish it. Oh my gosh, I love it though. That's really cool. What is it called again?
Marriage centered money, right?
Marriage centered money.
Yeah.
Okay.
The idea being, right, you put your marriage at the center of your financial plan.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This has been, yeah, I love it. Like, I like how you have a very approachable style when it comes to money. And it's not all of this jargon of like, what is he saying or what's happening? But yeah, I like how it's very, very approachable. So thank you for that. Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's at Pacesetter Planning, which is the name of my company. Company website's pacesetterplanning.com. And there's a link to get the book there as well. I have marriagecentermoney.com as the URL for the book if people want to pick that up as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate your knowledge when it comes to like financial planning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community, which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.